Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Blinken, appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning. I don't believe it has ever been more urgent for the case to be made on the central role of development and diplomacy. And of course, the chairman spent his time talking about Israel because I don't believe that the majority can defend this allocation because the allocation is indefensible. And also, I'd like to hear in your testimony the whole issue of humanitarian assistance in Gaza and the 35,000+ people who have been killed and the strategies of Israel in terms of how productive these strategies have been into ensuring Israel's security also. The challenges of the 21st century, they can't be solved by one nation. Our president recognizes that these challenges require teamwork. They require alliances and they require true partnerships. And that's why I am really just quite frankly appalled about the trends that we're seeing in the state Foreign Operations Appropriations Bill. The fiscal year 2024 House bill proposed a huge 15% cut from the prior year. We battled back to almost a 6% cut as the final level, but still face the greatest percentage cut across appropriations bill, the greatest. As of this hearing today, the House majority has told us that they plan to cut the bill a further 11% for fiscal 25. We have a problem, Mr. Secretary. The world will continue to get smaller. We have migration issues, climate, disease, even the flow of goods and crime, unfortunately, such as drugs. They're problems that are begging for a global approach. Countries overseas continue to see the United States as a beacon of hope and promise, but I don't know how long that's going to last. How long will we be able to rest on the achievements of prior generations? The Marshall Plan, the eradication of smallpox, the end of the Cold War, PEPFAR, before we realize that we are no longer offering the same leadership. My colleagues are often quick to focus on the influence of the People's Republic of China. But I will point out that China has now more embassies and more diplomats around the world than the United States does. More. Simply put, we are being outnumbered just when countries are clamoring for greater partnerships with the United States. It's not just important that the United States is showing up for partners around the world, but equally important to face the fact that America is showing. Diversity is the American and our country's superpower. However, far too often, the representation of the United States is not reflective of the full spectrum of backgrounds and experiences that America has to offer. And I know you agree with us on this. It's true for the workforce, but it's also true who the department works with. The president has set a goal to increase the share of contract dollars going to small and disadvantaged businesses to 15% across the federal government by fiscal 25. So I commend the State Department for already exceeding that goal. But Mr. Secretary, let me tell you, that obscures the fact that Black, Asian Americans, and Hispanic-owned small businesses are getting less than 2% each of State Department contracts. That's 2% each. I believe African American-owned firms is at 1.9%. AAPI firms are at 1.45%, and Hispanic firms are at 1.9%. I'm a former 8A contractor, Mr. Secretary, in the 80s and 90s, and this is less than what was taking place in terms of contracting then. And so we have to understand and look at why these numbers are shockingly low. We've got to do a better job making sure that historically disadvantaged entrepreneurs get a larger share of the State Department contract. Members, Mr. Secretary, they're outraged, and so I intend to follow up, and I just wanted to let you know with a letter to the department asking you to outline the strategy to increase the share of contract dollars that go to all historically disadvantaged groups, and why Black and Asian American and Hispanic firms are being denied access to these contracts. Now, 20 years ago, after we first started talking about this three-legged stool of national security, diplomacy, development, and defense, we are no closer to bringing balance to that stool. In fact, we have never been so lopsided. The resources that we spend on defense dwarf the resources that we spend on our overseas presence, the pursuit of American interests, and our most basic partnerships to build a safer world. I'm sure that you see this every day. We over-rely on our military tools because that's what's available, meanwhile starving our civilian diplomatic tools. Our military understands this and is often the first to advocate for development and diplomatic tools that they see as necessary. However, successive Congresses have refused to make the investments needed to take the pressure off of military action. And now, once again, our diplomatic and development activities are facing the biggest cuts of any part of the United States government. We can't keep going on like this. If we're serious about confronting these challenges, then it must be reflected in our budget. Without sufficient development funding, we face a future struck by cycles of crises that require more and more humanitarian interventions and even military interventions, and result in a less stable world. Secretary Blinken, you're currently crisscrossing the globe. You're listening to partners. You're hunting for joint solutions. And I'm sure getting an earful about United States policy. I'm eager to hear from you today what tools that you need, that the State Department needs to advance the mission of the United States and provide the leadership and partnerships of the world that the world, quite frankly, expects of us. What do you see as the cost of us stepping back and letting others fill the void? I see that everywhere in the world. What investments are we leaving on the table? The opportunities left untaken. What do you hear from our brave diplomats around the world and what they need to do their job? And I want to thank them for their service and their sacrifices, which they're making. And I want them to know that we do value their work in spite of these huge, horrific, terrible, deep cuts that are being proposed. So I look forward to our work together, Mr. Secretary, also with you, Chairman Diaz-Balart, and with all the members of this subcommittee to make the case for why this bill needs to invest more this year and in future years to serve America, to serve the American people, and yes, quite frankly, our entire planet. So thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I yield back.